What's up, guys? Welcome back. Or if you're new here, howdy for the first time. My name is Sean, and today I wanted to make a beginner's guide to Cursor AI. And I do not mean a basic beep setup guide. I mean some tried and true features and use cases of Cursor that, especially when you combine them together, will send your AI coding skills to another plane of existence. But first, what this video is not going to be. I'm not going to be going through prompts that I use when it comes to coding projects. We're not even going to be really coding anything. We're going to be going through what the features are and how they work. There are 6 of them. If you want to get more tutorials on how to actually code out projects with the prompts that I use to structure projects and all of that type of stuff and actually write the code, that will be in videos coming in the future. So again, today I'm going to be covering some high value features inside of Cursor and how they work with some very basic examples. Because the power of these AI tools is honestly amazing, but it gets even better when you know how to use their very best features. Because when I first got started with tools like Cursor and Windsurf, I was just enamored with how cool it actually was. But as I began building larger and larger and larger projects, I started running into problems, and it became clear that I needed better methods to wrangle the madness. So whether you are a complete beginner or even if you're in like a intermediate stage, there should be something in here at least that is going to be helpful to you. So without further ado, let's break down my top madness wrangling Cursor AI features. So when we're inside of our Cursor environment, one of the first things that we can do if we want to really start using this tool is we come over and we hit Command L on a Mac. I don't know what the Windows shortcut is, but you can go maybe ask an AI for that answer. And that pops us open this right-hand side chat pane. And so this is where like the first major section of like how you use these tools is going to live. And this is where most people, including myself when I first started, spent pretty much all of my time using only these 3 features. So the first feature that we have is our chat feature. And so chat feature is pretty much what it sounds like. It enables you to have a conversation with different aspects of your code base. So for example, if I wanted to come in and say, hey, where is the section of the code that handles my email component? So on my contact page, we have this email form thing. Where does that logic actually get handled? Well, I can just ask the system where that code lives, and it will tell me. Now, there's a few reasons why this is super valuable. Number 1, it helps you navigate really complicated code bases more easily. Again, as you build really big projects, it becomes a lot harder to work with things, especially if you are jumping into a project that maybe you didn't build. Maybe you have a job and you're now starting to use Cursor because you want to be more effective. It's going to help you navigate really large, more complicated code bases more easily because, again, you can just ask it questions. You can ask it where things are. You can ask it, number 2, how things work. I remember one of the first tech companies I worked at, they had this principle where we don't comment our code. And I mean, that's cool if you're a Chad senior developer, but as somebody that was in like a sales engineering type of role, it was very difficult for me to look at some code that someone wrote in PHP 5 years prior that was really bad and just understand how it works, right? That was difficult for me to do. And so a tool like Cursor can help you do that. You can highlight an entire block of code, for example, and say, how does this code work? And it will tell you exactly how it works, which is pretty awesome. And number 3, why this chat feature is pretty helpful. It really helps you reduce errors by not accidentally modifying the wrong file. So again, if you start getting into more complicated things, especially if you start working with like backends and using different vector databases and doing complicated like embeddings or building like agents in a tool like Python or something like that, it can get kind of complicated, to be honest, pretty quickly. And so you don't want to run into a situation where you start handling problems in the wrong file, or you start editing files that you never should have edited. So this chat feature can really help you, again, like navigate that code base as easily and as seamlessly as possible. Number two, we have this edit feature. And so, for example, I could come over and I could say, edit this email component so that it has a CC field in it and that it CCs this specific person. And so there's a few reasons, again, that's a basic example of using this, but a few reasons where this is super valuable. So I just gave an example of modifying like a few lines, but you can use this to extremely quickly update multiple files even, or a larger file. You can update a lot of different pieces of that file, again, with really basic, simple commands. Another benefit of this, and we're gonna kind of piggyback on what tip number 3 is that we can maintain consistency in our coding styles, how we like to code things, and what our guidelines for coding are. Because if we tell the system how we like to code, well, then when it goes to edit our code, it's going to follow our best practices. And so this editing feature, really, really helpful for, again, maintaining that consistency of how the project should be coded. And part of that is it makes it very, very fast to refactor existing code. So for example, you could take an entire chunk of a file and say, hey, I need you to refactor this so that the different pieces are actually named exports that live in their own file. And it will go through, find the relevant pieces of code, make the new files for it, and do all of those different pieces that you need. Again, super, super, super fast. Then last but not least, we have this agent functionality. And so what the agent functionality does that is different from the chat or the edit is that it can take on significant workloads and work on multiple different files. It can run terminal commands for you. Just imagine a situation where you need a much more complex workflow to be handled, and you need the system to be able to reason about the problem and go out and actually code solutions to that problem, create multiple files, connect the files together in the right way, run terminal commands for different packages that you need. All of those sorts of things is what the agent is going to be really great at. So for example, if I was to come in here and say something like, I want to make my project work with Twilio, it should accept a phone number in the form field, and then it should automatically text that person that we got their form and that we will reach out to them soon, right? If we wanted to do something and go through and take on multiple tasks, it can do that. And so there's, again, a few reasons why this is super valuable. Number one, you can create somewhat complicated interactions between different pieces of code automatically. Like I said earlier, you can give a command and literally walk away until it is done. This is one of my favorite things to do, where you just give like a reasoning model, for example, or an agent some complicated task that needs done. You come back 10 minutes later and it's still just chugging away while you're doing other productive things. So really awesome that it's just a huge workflow efficiency tool. And then last but not least, it has a really good, really amazing way to contextually understand your app and understand what files it needs to know about, then take actions on those files if it needs to, connect, again, different files together in different ways. Just really an awesome way overall to let things run automatically on autopilot. So there we have our first major tip or thing you need to know, which is how to use this chat composer. So coming up on number 2 is creating general rules for AI. So what this means is that we want to give Cursor a standard way of doing everything we want it to do. What does this mean? It's really great for things like basic naming conventions. For example, how you want files named, how you want folders named, how you want them structured, making sure that AI understands your full tech stack and how those pieces link together, or adding any other general rule that you find over time tends to bother you. Maybe it's how it does its error handling. Maybe it's how it builds certain types of features. Maybe It's how it handles certain types of like database interactions become like a super fucking pain in the ass, and you just wasted 2 hours because it's trying to do some migration. So once you've solved those problems, giving that general rule so that it doesn't run into that problem next time. And so we can see here some examples of general rules that I am using, for example, in this project, or that I use from time to time in other projects. And so there's a few reasons why this is super valuable, really two big ones. Number one, consistency across projects. You'll find as you're using tools like these that there are common problems you run into, especially again when you're having AI just craft you huge chunks of code and then you just put them into your project and run npm run dev and see hopefully does it work. You start running into the same problem consistently. And so you can then give that problem or your solution to that problem to the system so that it doesn't recreate the mistake. And ultimately what that does, so one, you have consistency across your projects, but number two, it makes it a lot faster and more efficient for the LLM to one-shot the answer that you actually want out of the gate. You don't have to have this back and forth of it doing something you never really wanted it to do in the first place. So number three, we have our project rules for AI. Now, this is slightly different from general rules because a general rule is something that in an ideal world is going to apply to any project that you make. Whereas a project rule is going to be specific to this project, what you are building, what your tech stack is that you're using on this project, and so on. You're not, like, those are going to be, again, specific to the project. And so if I'm in a project building out, for example, a React Native app, I'm not going to prompt what my Expo guidelines are. I'm not going to prompt what my Expo guidelines are when I then go over and create a Next.js app, right? That wouldn't really make sense. And so project rules are great for when we have, again, things that are very specific to this project. And we can see what some examples of those might look like here for a project where I'm working in TypeScript, where again, we're giving it project-specific considerations like how specific files should be handled, how certain tech conventions should be followed, and so on. And so again, a few reasons why this is really valuable. Number one, following specific coding paradigms or styles that are like specific to a language or specific to a piece of technology. So for example, maybe there's a convention that you want to follow every time you work with Supabase. Well, you can go out and you can find a Supabase specific set of project rules or create your own. And all you have to do is go paste that into your project. And now it's going to follow those conventions. And again, if you're like a beginner or even like exit level intermediate, maybe you've built some of these projects before, maybe you've commercialized them and tried to sell them, maybe you haven't, whatever the case might be, you can basically ride on the coattails in many ways of people that are a lot more talented than you in a specific thing. And I don't mean that disparagingly, it's just simply true, right? There are people out there that are very talented at software development and they're sharing this stuff, right? They're sharing this stuff for everybody to use. So why not go out there and integrate those ways of doing things that are based on sometimes decades of experience in software development and just integrate them into our project so that we're at least a lot further along than we would have been. So second reason this is super valuable, it helps mitigate risk by putting guardrails on sensitive actions. And I'll give you a really concrete example of this. You don't want to put, for example, your environment variables like in your actual front end code, right? Like you wouldn't want to send a front end request. You wouldn't want to you wouldn't want to send a front end request that has like your API tokens in your front end request. And now if you're somebody that is maybe just getting started coding, you maybe don't know that, right? And so you can go through, you can read that these are certain types of things that you probably shouldn't do. And then you can tell the code like, hey, anytime you're dealing with an environment variable, it needs to go in this specific file and it should only ever be used in backend requests. It should never be leaked to the front end, so on and so forth. Same thing with like security considerations. All of those best practices, again, that have grown over decades, you can just prompt the system on how to do those things properly. Number four is providing context, right? Providing context to the system. So Context allows you to, again, point the system to a specific piece of code or even external data. If you've been around AI for any significant amount of time, you probably hear it a lot. Context, 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 right? Well, if you're super new, what it means is we need to make sure that the model we're sending our commands to actually has all of the info we want it to have at the point that it makes a decision. So here are some examples of areas where you might want to provide context, especially as a beginner. Passing the LLM recent changes that you've made so it knows what you just did. Or different changes that have been made to files recently that might be causing a problem, for example. Passing the LLM the context of your code base. Passing the LLM specific files or specific lines from specific files. Passing the LLM content from an external website. Passing the LLM the output of your terminal so that it can help you with problems you are running into or knowing what's actually going on in the system and errors that are dumping and things like that. Passing the LLM specific rules for handling specific types of problems. Again, which we went through in number 2 and number 3. We can pass these to the system. So those are some use cases that, especially for a beginner, are going to be really valuable for you to start playing around with. So to think in context, if we were going to ask a question to our chat function, we would want to maybe provide the code base as an example and say, hey, where does this specific thing take place? Or maybe we're in our backend code and we're saying, hey, go look at the backend directory and tell me where X, Y, and Z is happening. That's all going to be super helpful passing that context through. Now, number 5, one of my favorite use cases coming in at number 5 is just really a detailed form of providing more context. And that's right, a context is so nice we used it twice for a specific type of context that will really, really help you start doing really cool shit a lot more quickly. So what do I mean when I talk about providing documentation? Well, we're talking about taking the, I hate to use a word to describe a word, documentation of a newer technology and passing it to the system. Why do we do that? Most language models have training data cutoff periods, meaning if you want to use a fancy new tool that literally just came out, most LLMs are not going to have access to that data, right? They might have a training cutoff that was in 2021, and now you're in 2025, or it's in 2023, now you're in 2025. It doesn't know about that thing. So if you were to ask it to go make you some request with it, it's probably going to hallucinate you a bad answer. And so what we can do is we can provide our documentation as context and then pass that through with the request. So if you ever run into a project where you need like very specific information about a technology to be passed to the language model so that it does something the right way the first time, you can simply give it to it. And the way that you do that is all you do is you go into the documentation section, you paste in the URL, and Cursor is going to go through and it's going to crawl all of those docs for you, which is pretty awesome. And then you can see how it goes through and pulls out all of the different pages. So it actually crawl through the documentation and pull every page. And then it will kind of know contextually when you ask it a question, which of those are relevant for it to go look at or not. And then hopefully can answer your question or solve your problem a lot more effectively. Now, last but not least, at number 6, it's often the case that we want to use the latest and the greatest model. So we want to tell Cursor to pull in specific models. When you first load up Cursor, you're not going to have access showing up in this little drop down here to every single model. Or maybe you've tested a bunch with a slightly more obscure model than the default and you want to start using it. You heard someone else talk about it with a specific use case and you want to start using it. Really great for testing the strengths of different models versus each other. You'll find sometimes that trying to solve a specific problem is a lot easier with a certain model. For my cases, for whatever reason, I find that Claude 3.5 for some reason solves bugs better than any other tool, right? So if I were to stack Claude versus even like something like DeepSeek R1, to be honest, Claude will just solve the problem. Like it'll one-shot a solution to a bug so much more quickly than a lot of these other tools. I don't know why that's the case. Might be partially how it's been trained or whatever, but it just simply is. And so once we know those sorts of things, like, man, if I run into a really annoying bug and I've been coding with O3 Mini because I've been building bigger features and now I need to solve this problem, sometimes it's more effective to swap into a different model to solve, again, a specific type of problem. So that is it. But before we go, blowhorn sound. I've got 2 bonus tips for you. Bonus tip number 1, you should use reasoning models for more complex planning. What does that mean? If you're going to have Cursor build out something significant, so like major features that have a lot going on inside, you want to use a model that is really good at planning out complicated problems. So a model like O3 or O1, or even DeepSeek R1, they can think through complicated problems better than something like Claude 3.5, for example, or like 4.0 Mini. And so we want to use the power of thinking models anytime we are in a situation where we're trying to build something more robust. Use a reasoning model. They're really good at thinking through things and planning things. And so let's leverage it for that. Bonus tip number 2, checkpoint restore. So this, I believe, is actually a new feature inside of Cursor because this used to drive me crazy. Again, if you're new to coding, you've probably heard by this point Git. And so it's version controlling, right? Now, one thing that happens when you're vibe coding is that you are getting so much out of the system that you just like, you keep going, and you don't like stash your changes somewhere. You don't ever create a checkpoint to say, hey, I just created this entire new feature. Let me commit this to memory so that if I ever need to roll back in time because I broke something, I can roll back to it. So if you're not used to doing that, one thing that can happen a lot is that you go in, you're doing all this cool stuff, you're vibe coding your way to ultimate glory, and then the AI breaks something that you just spent a lot of time working on. And if you were not committing those changes, you could spend an entire day or 2 trying to undo or unravel something. And then especially if you don't have like a development background, it's like you just fucking wasted your time and it sucks and you're mad. And so while it's gotten a lot better at not doing this and erasing major functional pieces of code, it still happens sometimes where you send something to Cursor or to Windsurf and it deletes major chunks of functioning code. It tries to solve the problem in the wrong file because it didn't look at the full context of your project. And again, super, super big pain in the ass. So it's gotten a lot better at it, but it does still happen. And so now Claude has this checkpoint restore. What this allows us to do is it allows us to revert back in time. It will undo all of the changes that it did. So in this example here that we just, say we built out this big Twilio feature and then we decide, hey, I don't want this feature anymore. We can just checkpoint restore and then go back in time to a point in time from before we did that. So that is it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I had fun with this one. Cursor is an amazing tool. If you want to see more content around these types of topics, coding, Cursor, Windsurf, vibe coding, all that type of stuff, let me know in the comments. I'm still in the stage where I'm picking, am I going to create more content around automations and codeless stuff, or go into actual, like showing full stack software development type of workflows and build out like actually robust projects that are kind of cool and aren't like stupid to-do lists. So let me know what you want to see in the comments. That's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one.